Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. This is episode number 77, and today's episode, folks, is going to be incredible. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we interview some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. On our show, we want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation events in their lives? The purpose of our show is to illustrate how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. And today, folks, you're going to hear some stories that haven't been told anywhere else but here on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. And there's so much information, we may have to break this into two different shows. Today's show is supported by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are really detailed 4, 6, and 8 foot prints of aircraft in profile views that are printed on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. We also do patches from the different units. These are so detailed, you can even see the stenciling on the missiles, the weapons, and we're doing a lot of upgrades to a lot of the drawings that we've done previously because we have found more information about the aircraft or whatever. But folks, go to wallpilot.com and order from the 140 ready to print, or let us do a custom one for you. Tell us what airplane you want. What's your favorite airplane? We can put your name on it. We can put a tail number on it. We can even put the weapons load of your choice on the profile. These are extremely detailed, folks, and our financial support comes from the sale of these profile prints. So please go by wallpilot.com and order from the ready to print, or send us a sheet that says, here's the custom one I want. Looking forward to hearing from you. On today's show, I was turned on to this by a very dear friend of mine, Scott Brown. And he said, you've got to go buy this website. And I did. And it was amazing. And so I called this gentleman and I said, I'd really like to have you on. And it took us a while to do this, but finally we got Navy A4 and A7 pilot from the Vietnam War, Beau Smith, on. And folks, some of these stories you're going to hear today are just bone chilling because he's going out and hunting SAM sites during the Vietnam War. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the 77th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show with Navy Captain Beau Smith, A4, A7 driver during the Vietnam War. Before I start today's show, we need to do a little admin queep. Queep is a word in the Air Force lexicon meaning stuff to do. And the first one breaks my heart. I've mentioned my good friend Scott Brown on this show several times, and his beautiful daughter Reagan, who just recently got married. Scott lost his wife Tracy, Reagan's mom, 2 weeks ago. Scott and Tracy have been friends of ours for a very long time, folks. She was an OBGYN nurse. Scott and Tracy live in Houston, and she would go down there and spend several days working in a hospital down in San Antonio. And unfortunately, she is no longer with us. My heart goes out to Scott because these two loved each other like you can't believe. Scott and Tracy came out and spent a week with us at Iron Blossom Lodge up in Snowbird, and we just had a ball. And all of us here at the Lessons from the Cockpit Show send our dearest condolences to my good friend Scott. I love you, brother, and we're so sorry that Tracy is no longer here. So please, folks, raise a prayer, raise a glass for my good friend Scott and his wonderful daughter Reagan, going through a tough time right now without his beloved wife and her mom. Second thing, I haven't published for almost 4 weeks, and there's a good reason for that. First of all, I have been on the road and got a fantastic opportunity to actually do an interview on an airfield, and it was the first base I was assigned to, Pease Air Force Base, now Pease International Air Park. The FBO out there called Port City Air, and their director, Jamie McCarthy, who has now become a very, very good friend, we actually stood in one of the FB-111 drive-thrus, and I interviewed him as we had executive jets going by us, Atlas 747s going by us, a U.S. Coast Guard helicopter that was taking off. This is a very active airfield, and I didn't know a lot about fixed-based operations or FBOs, but folks, you're going to get an education on what it takes to run an operation like that, where you have military and civilian aircraft coming in and going out, and then you have massive exercises and what it takes to do that. We're also going to have 2 Vietnam MiG killers come on. I've already interviewed one, doing the interview for another one on Monday, who happened to be a childhood hero, and we actually met face-to-face in Anchorage, Alaska at Elmendorf Air Force Base when I was on my mission for the Mormon Church 45 years ago. So look forward to those episodes coming in the next few weeks. Good morning, Bo, and welcome to the Lessons from the Cockpit show.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. And thanks again for being on with us. I have really been looking forward to having you on the show for a couple of months since Scott Brown said, hey, I think you need to have this guy on. He's got some great information. And your website, oh my gosh, Bo, is fabulous, fabulous. So why don't you tell us who you are real quick? And in that introduction, tell everybody about your website so everybody goes there too, okay?
All right. Well, I came into the Navy through the NROTC program at Cornell University. And when I went through flight training in 1964, 65, my wife said, I had an instructor that had a bunch of Korean War ribbons. She says, it's too bad you won't get a chance to do any of that. Well, that didn't work out that way. But anyway, I decided I wanted to fly the attack mission. Although the fighters at those days were the F-8 Crusader, which was a great airplane, but it was going to the F-4 Phantom, and that's the fighter mission. But I didn't want to drill a bunch of holes, so I wanted to go attack targets. So I was fortunate to get through the training command and into the BA-44 A4 RAG, which is the equivalent of a RTU in the Air Force. And in 1965, and just as they decided to set up a carrier called the Dixie Station Carrier, and this was going to be attack-oriented, no fighters. The whole purpose of it was to do close air support and direct air support. So it's an attack pilot's dream. So that's where I started, in Dixie Station in the Mekong Delta, and then we went from there. So we'll talk about where to. But
okay. And then you flew A7s also.
I flew A7s later on in 72, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, and you and I were just talking about the differences between the two airplanes. Why don't you talk about that, about a dumb airplane and a smart airplane?
Yeah, well, the A4, the scooter, was probably the most fun to fly. And you were part of the airplane. My shoulders were on the canopy rails. My head was on the canopy. There was really very little room in there. And all we had to deliver weapons with at the time was an ADI, a gyro that gave you what your dive angle was, and an altimeter, and a hard gun sight. That was it. So it was a dumb airplane. There was nothing smart about it. No computers involved. You had to learn the skill of delivering a weapon, depending on what it was, and we'll get to that. And the weapons themselves were dumb. They were iron bombs. Most of what we dropped in Vietnam were thermally coated, but we did drop some non-thermally coated World War II and Korean weapons, and which during the Forrestal Fire became a subject to that, because we really dropped. We were dropping too many bombs. We ran out of bombs at this time. And I'll talk to her about it. There were times where we went flying with 2 or 3 bombs instead of 6 or 10. But the aircraft had a centerline station. Basically, the A4A and B, old ones, just had a centerline station and one wing station on each wing, and that's what we went into South Vietnam with. In the A4B, we had carried a centerline tank, had weapons on each wing, and we carried either bombs or rockets. We had 5-inch rockets, and we had 2.75 rockets, and we had a little gun that was in the airplane, which was good. Wasn't a great gun, the Mark 12 gun, but at least it was a gun. when we were going in 1965, as they put together the Dixie Station carrier, we had Jerry Tuttle, who got to be a very famous admiral in the Navy, was the lieutenant commander. He handpicked out of two or three or four classes guys for the squadron. We ended up, those JOs ended up going for 2 cruises in Vietnam, 200 missions flying together. That was just totally different than most places have people come and go in this time. But here, we actually had the same 9 or 10 junior officers, the core of the junior officers, and the same lieutenant commander division leaders, Jerry Tuttle, Lieutenant Commander Possum Terrell, and First Lieutenant Ron Monroe, who the 3 of them became very famous pilots, and they were our division leaders. Our COs and XOs kind of come and went. Mostly they were too old and good guys, but really didn't lead the squadron tactically. The 3 lieutenant commanders did. And the JOs, we really got very good at bombing because we didn't have to worry too much getting shot at. We could make individual runs on targets with a close air, with a FAC, flying a Piper Cub down in the Mekong Delta, and just one bomb at a time, and really got to perfect our bombing technique. We also had napalm, and I remember one mission particularly well where was very unusual. At the beginning part of the war, the Army it was U.S. Army personnel carriers, and the VC were lined up behind the berm of a rice paddy in black pajamas, literally right behind the berm. And we had napalm. We just went and dropped napalm, 2 napalms per airplane, 8 napalms right down the line of those VC. They didn't use those tactics very long before, but at that time it was pretty bad, just for them anyway.
It's like lining up in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. It was very unusual. We had very little times where we'd see kind of a peace war, where you could identify the front lines and all that. Most of the time, we were going to a FAC, and the FAC would shoot a Willie Pete rocket into the trees, and we would bomb the trees. And we'd call that direct air support. Occasionally, the trees would blow up because we were bombing a weapons cache. Or the FAC would say, "Oh, I'm taking some fire, and go ahead, and it's coming from so and such," and we would go ahead and direct it there. We didn't see much other than his flares. We had bombs. We had 5-inch Zuni rockets, a wonderful weapon, forward firing. You could do some damage with it, and it was very accurate. Then we had these Lao 3 pods that had 27 2.75 rockets in it, and they went every which way, but they looked impressive. And we had napalm. One of the fun things was that the fuses of our napalm weren't very good, and the napalm would hit, and you'd see this big thing of fuel and nothing. It wouldn't go on. So we developed a tactic where the wingman would strafe the lead's napalm with HEI and light it up. You would go in right off the wing, watch his napalm go in, and you end up getting pretty low and drop it off, then swap the lead, and then you'd put your napalm and the lead would strafe it, and it was more fun. And you really got to learn how to fly formation because we were moving. We were pretty low level for some of these missions, and so we kept the airspeeds up, and so there's a lot of G's involved and a lot of napalm drop. It was pretty spectacular. So, and we didn't get a lot of fire. We didn't have to worry too much about it. We never got a hit, an airplane hit. The only times we did was when we flew too low ourselves and either got into our own bomb blast or bounced off a river, which happened a couple of times. People would come back with mud on the top of their wings. And plane captains would go crazy. And
what have you been doing with my airplane?
we had one guy that actually flew through the roof, a tile roof of a house on a low pullout, and the FAC went crazy. He says, "I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen the airplane fly through the target."
Yeah, and come home with tile in the wings.
The guy came back with tile in the slats of the A4 had slats in the forward division of the wings, and he had his slats were jammed with red tile from the roof of that, because in the A4, if you pulled on the G's, you could pull the slats out. So you could actually have G on there, which he did. On a low pullout, he probably had about 6 G's. So those slats were out, and then he hits the roof, and he recovers, and the slats try to come back, and they can't. Anyway, we're more dangerous to ourselves than the other side. That changed after the first line period. We went from the Mekong Delta. We started moving up north. And I'm in a very few group of persons who actually have flown from the Mekong Delta, doing close air support and direct air support, and flown all the way up the length of the South Vietnam, and then in RUPEC 2 through 6 Bravo and north. We had another mission which was kind of very interesting because it was unusual, across the Mekong Delta to an area called the Three Sisters, which is right near the Gulf of Thailand. So it's all the way across the Mekong Delta. And we got out there, a flight of 4 A4s with a FAC in a little village that called everybody in from the farms. And then everybody that was outside the village gates were VC. And the VC were mortaring, using mortars on the village from the hills. So we could see the mortars. And we had Zunis. Here we are shooting Zunis at the mortars. It was a good feeling because we saved the village. Then bombing was different. Trying to bomb somebody that's on the side of a hill is hard to do. So it's nice to have a forward firing thing like a Zunis.
Why is that, Bo?
Well, because the bombing, you tend to be long or short. So if you have a flat surface, it's a little easier. If you're a little long on a bomb that's going to be up the hill or down the hill, to try to get it right on a hilly angle is a challenging issue.
Got it.
All the practice you're doing is in Kansas where it's flat, right? The only practice you have, even anyway, we would go to Yuma, Arizona, and we'd bomb some in the Chocolate Mountains with live ordnance. Right. Memory is that most of those targets were pretty flat. It wasn't the same. No, we were much better bombers. So when we got finished with that line period, with all that practice, 2 flights a day, 1 bomb at a time with a FAC, we were very good bombers, which would serve us well as we move north, being accurate. The closer your CP is, the circus area probable to the target, the more effective your bombs are, so the fewer missions you have to fly on a target.
So you transition from A4s to A7s, and now you've got computers and all kinds of things that are helping you put bombs on target. Talk about that for just a moment.
And we haven't talked about the A4 in 67 during Rolling Thunder with the targets we were doing Iron Ant and all that. So we'll talk to that at some point. But if you're in a SAM environment and you're in an A4 and you have a missile SA-2 shot at you, it's pretty easy to defeat that missile. That first missile, you see it, you drop the nose, you keep your airspeed up, you put some G's on it, on the airplane. Those missiles, those SA-2s were designed to hit a B-52 at 20,000 feet that's not pulling a lot of G's. So they just couldn't turn. But it wasn't the first missile, it was the second, or the second from one site and another one from. So you have 2 different sites shooting at you. Then it gets more difficult, and about all you can do, a split-ass spiral to lower altitudes. When you do that in the A4, if you're inland, you really don't have any idea where you are. To try to get back to the target, you're lucky if you can get back to where the sea is and get back to the Tonkin Gulf. It destroys your ability to get to the target. In the A7, because you have a navigation system that's inertial nav, and you have a flight path marker to the target, you can do that SAM maneuver, and then all you have to do is fly the airplane to the flight path marker. It takes you right back to the target. So it's much easier to exist in the SA-2 environment in a smart airplane like that. So it's pretty good. Yeah, and we'll get to about the altitudes were much different. In 66, of course, when we went north, we had A4Bs and we had no ECM equipment at all. We had the APR-27, which told you when a SA-2 was in the air, but we didn't have any countermeasures, nothing. And we had no fighters. So we pretty much stuck to coastal routes, the coastal targets.
Yes.
We did go inland a couple of times up there, but we got a lot of practice getting up there and surviving in the A4B. Then we turned around and went home and had a really quick turnaround. We changed airplanes to the A4Cs, and we were designated Iron Hand. So we were flying the Shrikes and Zunis against SA-2 sites. And we were pretty effective because we could get right over the top of a SAM site in orbit at 12 or 14,000 feet. Our guess was they were going to shoot at us. They had to save their missiles for the strike group. We were out in front of the strike group. 10 minutes sometimes, well out in front. They also wouldn't want to commit their MiGs because as soon as they would commit their MiGs, we had bar cap. We had no fighters on our ship, but there were F4s from other ships, and the Oriskany had there are two kinds of F8s. F8s for air-to-air guns, F8s for air-to-ground. But so we were out there betting that they would not shoot at us. And once we got over website or SAM sites that were occupied, we just orbit there waiting. When the strike group came in and they turned their fan songs on, we would shoot right down the throat. And if we expended our Shrikes, we'd shoot 5-inch rockets. It was these tactics were very effective, I thought. But it was only because we could orbit the target. In 1972, when we came back, they had the ZSU, quad-mounted ZSU-23 defending those sites, and those guns could shoot accurately up to 12,000 feet rapid fire, and we no longer could orbit those SAM sites. We had to stand off and kind of lob the Shrike into the basket. Much different.
And those were radar-directed guns, too, weren't they?
Yeah, if you stayed above 12,000 feet, you get down to 10, 12,000 feet, they can barrage fire 3757 without any radar. They just put barrages up there. There were some radar controlled 57 millimeters, but most of the radar controlled guns are 85 or 100 millimeter. Okay. I don't know if I ever saw any 100 millimeter, but I saw lots of 85. Yeah. And it could get up there around 15, 18,000 feet. But our ECM gear was really good. Those fire can, flap wheel, conical scan radars, we had range gate pull off on them, and I can't tell you how many times I heard the radar come in solid tone and then go off because the ECM gear drove it off. So once we're up about 18,000 feet, the only thing they could shoot at us was really radar controlled 8500 and the SA-2s. And we lost very little airplanes en route to the targets. We lost all our airplanes in the target area, in the dive bomb run, or on pull-offs. That's where one advantage of the A7 in 1972 was that we could drop our bombs much higher because the system would allow us to roll in at 12, 14,000 feet, and we would be releasing our ordnance at 8,000, and we were out of there well above 5,000 feet. Where in the A4, we're rolling in at 10 or 12,000 feet. We're releasing at 5,000 feet, and we're pulling out at 3,000 to 4,000 feet. So at 3,000 to 4,000 feet, you got a lot more things can shoot at you, and that's where the hits were. That's where I got hit on the mission that I got hit was pulling off on a Mark 36 destructor mine mission at the Haiduang Railroad and Highway Bridge. And even though, we were tail end charge, we were the last section in, and I told my wingman, we're going whatever way everybody in front of us goes, we're going the other way. So we did, but still, the airplane got hit. So, once you get down around those altitudes, and of course, they only had SA-2s, when you just make a few years after that, now they have SA-3s and SA-6s and all kinds of stuff. And those are more low altitude type SAMs, much tougher environment. You just can't get down in that area with them. So today it's all standoff weapons. You don't get that down the close. You asked me what I thought was really important. Few things for me in our environment in those days. the ability of formation flying skill was really important. It was section integrity, and you had that wingman had to be able to stay with you no matter what the leader did. Didn't make any difference. Wingman had no excuse ever, even if the lead was in full power. You just had to learn to use the turn as need be and stay with them. So formation, you never wanted to be alone up there. So formation flying was really skilled. We got really good at it. Yeah. And we also flew with the same people all the time. And as I said, here I had these, same 3 lieutenant commanders, and I flew with one Lieutenant Commander Possum Terrell, pretty famous guy. I have almost 200 missions with him. And that's very important to be able to do that. When I was flying the 105, I was Ted Tolman's wingman, and we were on a basic flight maneuver, BFM, which is 2 sections, and I was a wingman on the Tolman section, and a guy named Captain Paul Shee, who was in the book Thud Ridge too, as a young guy. He was a wingman on the other section, and he said to me, "I don't believe you could stay with Ted Tolman." And I told him, and it was true. I said, "I am an average Navy combat wingman. We can fly with anybody." And I was doing things in the 105, like using rudders to keep the fuselage of the 105 parallel with Tolman at 3 and 4 Gs. And people just don't, the average people just don't fly like that. And I could stay with Terrible Ted, and I got a lot of brownie points from those Air Force guys, because here's this Navy A4 pilot who can fly the 105 in formation at whatever the other guy's doing. Well, so that was in the environments we were looking at in 1966 and 67, and still in 72, formation flying skill was survival.
Yeah.
The other thing that I have in there is that where the Navy had an advantage over the Air Force is that each air wing sort of had their own tactics. From the Air Defense Commander's viewpoint, you never knew. If you had the Oriskany, the Constellation, and the Intrepid, those are 3 air wings doing different tactics. Mm-hmm. And where the Air Force coming out of Karat-Takli, where the kids would go in there, the Air Force is flying pretty standard tactics. I mean, to the point where when B-52s did linebacker 2, they came down the same SAC, had them going down the same line. No wonder they got, plus the SA-2 missile was designed that it should be 52. So because our tactics were always going to be a little different. In 1967, there's 3 of us, 3 carriers up there, the Oriskany, the Intrepid, and the Constellation. Here's the Intrepid that has, A4Cs, Iron Hands though.
Yeah.
No fighters, except we had a detachment of Sundowners that were very, very famous. Tudor Tig, Joe Zatrapi, Tony Nargi in F8s. And those guys didn't do MIGCAP. They did TARGAP with us, and they never left us. They were really good. The MIGCAP and the BARCAP had to come from the Constellation, because they're the only ship that had F4s. And the Oriskany. So we would go 3 carrier strikes, 3 carrier air wings, and 1 target. The Constellation and the Intrepid, we were at 18,000 feet, and the Oriskany, they were en route altitudes were 12,000 feet because they didn't trust their ECM gear. And at the end of the cruise, the Intrepid and the Constellation lost 25 airplanes, and the Oriskany lost over 50.
Oh my gosh!
With just the tactics were different, and But in 66, of course, the Oriskany did some famous missions. The Hanoi Thermal Power Plant with Walleye Ones, and just really pretty famous strikes. Yeah. But they maintained the same tactics in 67 as they did in 66, and they lost airplanes because of it. They'd go en route, and 37, 57 could shoot at them. We were well above it. So that was my second. My third one is limit your exposure in the target area, which made a difference between the A4 and the A7. A4s are delivering their ordnance at 45 degrees of bank and releasing at 5,000 feet and pulling out at 3,000 and 4,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
The A7 was rolling in at 12 and 13,000 feet and was out of there altogether by 5,000 or 6,000 feet. So you never got, you just, you weren't in it long for, if it's barrage kind of fire and it's not aimed, you don't want to jink. That's the other thing. Inexperienced pilots are out there jinking around. If it's barrage fire, you want to go in a straight line. You want to limit the amount of time you're there. You don't need to be jinking around. It's only the aimed fire, and the North Vietnamese got really good at that. They mixed aimed 85 millimeter in with barrage 57 millimeter. So you pretty much had to, there was a lot of stuff being shot.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a lot of interesting missions.
And you mentioned on your website that you did, like, I think you called it road reconnaissance, and you do it at night.
We did a lot of road reconnaissance, which is looking for truck parks, looking for sometimes single bicycles with an 85 millimeter shell strapped to the guy's back. Really, but primarily you're looking for trains, which I never saw, but you're looking for Wiblicks, which are waterborne logistics craft, and trucks, that kind of stuff, and truck. So you're flying 3,000 to 4,000 feet and kind of S-turning over a road, and because above that, it's interesting. We bombed the heck out of a truck that turned out to be a buffalo, water buffalo.
Oh, no.
Because you couldn't tell. They were both black objects on a road. So you had to get a little lower to see what you were doing. When we moved up north in 66, we had Possum Flight, which was Lieutenant Commander Terrell, myself, and Dave Parsons. Now, Dave Parsons and I were both in the original 10 JOs. And we had flown together all those down south fact flights. So the lead was responsible for looking for the Wiblicks and et cetera. And we were flying these V8, these figure eights over from section to section. And our job was to look for SAMs and MiGs and fire and stuff like that. And once Possums found something to bomb up, we'd pull up and do one run and be out of there. The first mission we were supposed to do was a road recce from Nam Dinh to Ninh Binh. And this was in Route Pac 5. And so we're out there and we're doing our recce pattern, and Possum flew right over Ninh Binh and didn't see much. Well, all of a sudden we start taking all this fire. We say, what is this big bridge up here? We had road recce the Than Hoa Bridge on one of our first missions up there.
Oh, my gosh.
But, you got shot at, you got back to the ship. You had a glass of scotch and you said, okay, I survived today. And you learned as you went how to survive in the environment.
Would you do this at night, though, too?
Just the way it was.
Night road recce?
The way it was. What's that?
You do
night
road recce?
Night road recce was basically a waste of time. We couldn't do it on Intrepid because we only flew in the daytime. So we didn't have to do it. But in the night in the A7, we got tasked to do night road recce. We even got tasked on one flight to fly an A6 kind of profile, which is silly. We didn't do it. I refused to do it. They expected me to fly an A6 kind of low altitude radar. I didn't know what my wingman was supposed to be doing while I'm doing this.
Yeah.
One thing for the A6 to do it. It's another thing for A7s. But on a road recce, we would have 4 Mark 82s and 2 Rockeyes, because by 72, the Zuni rocket wasn't allowed carriers anymore because of not just John McCain's, but there were 2 or 3 incidents where a Zuni rocket fired on a flight deck. So it was replaced by the Rockeye. The Rockeye was a pretty good, because it covered so much area, it was a pretty darn good weapon. And with the A7, you could toss it. You didn't have to get down amongst them. You could toss it pretty much where you wanted to. So the question is, are you going to see anything? More than likely, you're not. So what we ended up doing we knew the geographic position of some of the AAA sites, the bigger AAA sites. We knew where they were. Yeah. And in the E7, you could toss bomb to a set of coordinates. So we would be up there, and we would just toss a Mark 82 at 2 o'clock in the morning at some 85 millimeter site. And it was like the B-52 raids in the South, along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Those 4 suckers, they were just getting bombed through the rain. Now, they might have got down in their tunnels, but to be able to just kind of, keep them awake by tossing a Mark 82 into an 85 site was kind of a cool thing to do. Occasionally, they might light up and you could turn around and put Rockeye on them and do some damage. So I always had 3 or 4 coordinates to put a bomb where I wanted to. There was one 85 site at Than Hoa that shot at me a few times, and I always saved a bomb on a night road wrecking. Bomb in 82 to those guys. So we weren't really able to do much. We're up there. Road wrecking at night is kind of a silly thing. Now, there was some work about bombing under flares, and there was one squadron on the Riskety. I think they were on the Riskety. I think they were VA 152, the Gold Knights or something. They got really good at bombing under flares, and they were able to find a lot of trucks and stuff. But it was a dangerous thing to do. It was hard. You got vertigo easily that way, but most people refused to do that. Yeah. Everybody was bombing above the flares. Yeah, the flares, you could do some recce at night with flares, but vertigo was a problem for the pilots involved. But you could find some trucks. It's just that most people just didn't want to fool with it. But this one squadron got very good at it. If you pick a tactic and you train to it, you can get more done than somebody that just tries it. So there's another case where there's 152 bombing under flares and nobody else is doing it. So
they were good at it.
Yeah, they were good at it. Yeah, they were good at it. So I think that's in the book about the Sweet 16 or whatever, the Bloody 16. That book talks about those guys. Yeah. But I don't think those guys were on Oriskany. I think Oriskany was 162 and 163. But anyway, I'm not too sure. Yeah. I'm pretty sure about 162 because our XO on the America in 1972 was one of the guys who flew the thermal power plant raid in 66 off the Oriskany. So he knew a lot about. Interestingly enough, he wasn't on the raid against the Than Hoa Bridge that dropped the Than Hoa Bridge. Yeah. Funny, writing that memoir, I couldn't remember very much about the 72 cruise. I had a few memories, but not many. And I had pretty much blacked out because there were some close calls in that time. And I had pretty much blacked out that whole thing. It wasn't until I started writing the memoir and I got in my logbook and started talking to people about, where I was able to unravel some of the missions, especially the one on the battle that was there in South Vietnam that I wrote about. There was a really terrific use of bombs off A7s. And there was another time that Ray Thomas mentioned to me that we came in with 4 A7s and we had 10 Mark 82s each. We had 40 Mark 82s. Oh, and the FAC calls us up and says there was a tank. You never saw a tank. So there was a tank. And I was the flight leader, and I dropped 1 Mark 82 to supposedly work around to finally get it. And that first bomb was a direct hit. The tank is gone. And so what do you do with the other 39 bombs, Because that was the FAC figured he'd work that target, and have 2 or 3 flights work it. But the first bomb off that A7 was a direct hit on the tank. It was gone.
It's like hitting a rabbit with a 30-06, isn't it? Yeah, it just blows the thing to smithereens.
That was one of the huge differences about having a smart airplane. Now, not that you can't couldn't accurately bomb off the A4. We had between the cruises, between 66 and 67, we had basically the same group of people.
Yeah.
And we had a bombing competition at Cecil Field. And Possum Terrell, who was a great bomber with a SPAD background, he had a 10-foot CEP, 10 foot. And mine was about 25, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Possum lost because Lieutenant J.G. Atkinson had 6 bullseyes, iron sight bombing off an A4. I mean, so, you could get good. It's like the Air Force in strafing.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't had the M61 gun yet because I wasn't in A7s. I didn't do A7s till 172. So 68, 69, I was flying 105s. And I had to do my pittance in the AT-33 first, and then finally moved up to the 105. About the time that General Hardinger became the head guy, who he ended up being 16th Air Force as a 3-star. And I was playing racquetball with him when he made Brigadier General. So I got to know he was really good at treating me as the Navy guy. But I was shooting about 15%, which in the Navy is pretty good. Ted Tolman or George Bogart or somebody called me aside and says, you can't be an instructor in the 105 and shoot 15%. Because Tolman and Martin are shooting 50 and 60%.
Yeah.
So they taught me how to strafe with slant range by comparing the 1.9 mil Pipper with a 4-foot bowl, and when the two were the size, you're at 2,000 feet. So here you're shooting at 2,000 feet slant range in a 105 at 500 knots, and you're pulling out around 50 or 60, but you're shooting the hell out of that target too.
Yeah.
So when I went back to the Navy in the A7, which is the same gun, I used the same techniques. So I was, most guys were strafing at 15%, and I was shooting 30, 40% in the A7 using the Air Force slant range techniques as opposed to, because in the Navy you have a mil sight setting and you're shooting at your altitude, which is much further out. So, and air-to-air guns in the 105, we get on that dart, we'd be pretty close to it. We could obliterate it. There was slant range shooting was just something we didn't do. And even the Zuni rockets, we were pretty much shooting on a mil setting and a dive angle and shoot at a certain altitude, not at a certain slant. So we used a lot of trigonometry. We didn't use a lot of calculus, but we used a lot of trigonometry in iron sight bombing. Yeah. So a lot different. The last thing that I had on my thing was about compartmentalizing. We get up there and we watch Top Gun and we see Goose with a picture of his wife. I don't know anybody that ever had a picture of their family in their jet cockpit in combat. You had to be all business. That's all. If you couldn't do that, those are the guys that ended up holding high or staying safe and not jeopardized everybody. I found out that one of my VA-15 67 squadron mates was so scared he did that. His leader would be road wrecking at 3,000 to 4,000 feet south of Vienna. He would be holding at 8,000 and 10,000 feet, which was jeopardizing his leader. And I told him at the reunion, if I'd known that, you'd lost your wings. You just can't go in. And I know that there were some JOs in the 72 cruise. We had a CO that was just hell-bent in getting a Silver Star. And he was doing stuff that would endanger anybody, certainly as wingman. And so some of the wingmen refused to fly with him because he was just there was a big difference in the medal philosophy in the Air Force and the Navy too, about one medal difference. Silver Stars were DFCs in the Navy. Air Force Silver Stars were. And if you were a lieutenant, your chances of getting a DFC are really small. You're probably going to get DFCs downgraded to individual air medals, or commendation medals. The DFCs were getting there in the Navy. That was what a strike leader was getting. The division leader, strike leader, can't always get a DFC. In the Air Force, they were getting Silver Stars, or in some cases, like the Dover Bridge raid. There's 4 Air Force crosses, 4 or 5 Air Force crosses. Not just Harry Shearer, but the Wild Weasel leader got an Air Force Cross for that. I'm not. That's just kind of, it looks nice on there and all that kind of stuff. But I thought that the JOs with 200 missions, somewhere in there should have got a DFC. I got 2. One of them was because I did the Iron Hand tactics, and it was kind of in recognition of the success of that. And the other one was that mission where I got hit and had a big engagement, and that was a DFC. I got awarded that at McConnell, and all those Air Force guys apologized to me. I said, that would be at least a Silver Star in the Air Force, but not in the Navy. Just Leighton Smith, who led the strike that dropped the Thanwall Bridge, did not get a Silver Star.
That's amazing too, because that was a target that was
the world's most famous target.
Exactly, Bo. Everybody knew about that stupid bridge.
The Air Force had gotten the approaches pretty well. The bridge was not really very usable. This was a big walleye, hit the pedestal, dropped the bridge in the span in the river. And Snuffy did all the planning. And of course, he ended up being a 4-star. So, he did all right. He did all right in the Navy, but
he just recently passed away. Snuffy just recently passed away.
We were roommates for both of those cruises, the Med cruise and the 72 cruise. So, and he ended up, he was not happy with it. The write-up that's in Stephen Kuntz's book, Dragon Jaw, I think Snuffy wrote the Thanwall portion of it. But the guy that actually hit the bridge was his wingman. It was the wingman's walleye. And Snuffy's walleye was close behind, but there was enough that the wingman's walleye was first in, so it was a clean shot, and there was tape of it, And by the time Snuffy's was in there, the pedals had already been hit. It was milliseconds difference. And Snuffy probably got a hit too, but he, as the strike leader, I think Mark Baldwin got a DFC, as he should have, as a wingman, getting that big walleye hit on the bridge. Even though everybody had, I had probably at least 10 missions against the Thanwall Bridge. So it was just something that, it was hard. It was so well designed by the same guy that did the Eiffel Tower. And they had sand.
I did not know that.
Same guy that did the Eiffel Tower designed the Thanwall Bridge. And of course, the Vietnamese by then had sand all, so the bridge was hard to knock.
Yeah, it was it was probably the most heavily defended target in Vietnam at that time period, wasn't it?
Well, Hanoi was.
I know. Hanoi was.
I think the roughest was the Thanwall, the Thud Ridge approach from the northwest, having to go through almost certainly a MiG opposition, followed by SAM opposition, followed by local targets. So somebody that had 100 missions over North Vietnam, if you were 105 pilot, you probably had at least 25 of them to Hanoi down Thud Ridge. Where in the Navy, I ended up with 305 missions, and I probably had 5 or 10 missions comparably in the Hanoi. I had lots of missions around Haiphong and Thanwall Bridge and Vinh and all that, 6 Bravo. and some mining missions at Hangei and Haiphong. But I didn't have to go into the heart of downtown like the Domer Bridge raid. I mean, those guys, I mean, you're bombing downtown Hanoi. The closest one I had, where we were very fortunate that we came back from, that bridge was 8 miles from Hanoi. Phu was a turn point. I mean, it was getting there. We were certainly up there, MiG country.
Yeah.
But we didn't have MiGs, but we had SAMs from a couple different directions, and we were fortunate to. I went by to prepare for this discussion, my website, and the tape of the SA2's sounds in my laptop did not work today. I don't know what. There's a 2-minute tape.
Yeah.
It's on that mission to the bridge, and recorded by Ray Thomas.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
Bo, I listened to it several times. It's chilling.
It is. I mean, when you think of that's what it's like when you get your nose up there in North Vietnam and 6 Bravo anywhere. Because you don't have one site, you have 2 or 3 going, and there could be 5 or 6 missiles in the air. Some people report like 20 and 30. I don't know about that, but I've seen up to 5.
Yeah.
And that particular mission for my wingman and I at the rolling point, which we could not really make out the target. The weather was broken weather.
Yeah.
Fighter pilots said the weather was fine. Well, it was fine for the fighter pilots because it was fine above 5,000 feet. Yeah. Unfortunately, at 5,000 feet, it was broken, so it was hard to see in there. And I was pushing it to get up there, and probably too hard, and we rolled in. We probably had my wingman was a good wingman, and he probably was at the right distance apart to have for the fan song to not be sure whether it's 1 or 2 targets. Yeah. The other thing is they were pretty much shooting at 90 degrees to us, which means if it went off right at where we were, all of that stuff is going past us. Yeah. So in most cases, the SAMs dudded, but one of them passed between me and my wingman. If it had gone up, neither one of us would have come back. So it was a dicey mission. And I think Ray's tape, that's only a little short portion. I mean, it's 40.
That's only 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. And you got where it was just chaos listening. I preferred the ECM gear in our 67 or the APR 25 because we actually studied the tapes because we were the Iron Hand Squadron.
Yeah.
So during the transit, I had gone shot the strike at a Point Mugu and got my ECM training at the Navy base. Jesus, Michigan. I had tapes of spoon rest and tapes of flap wheel and fire cannon, and tapes of the fan song, and every pilot in VA-15 studied those tapes.
Mm-hmm.
So, because anyone could have been flying an Iron Hand mission. And so when you entered and you started hearing the acquisition of the spoon rests, and then you had the fire can and you listen to the fire can lock on, and then the range gate pull off of the ALQ-51, break the lock, and you could hear it happening. You didn't have to look. You could hear it. We were all ECM operating. It was different as a pilot, as a bomber pilot. You still were able to hear that as a wingman. And then, so if you got locked on with a fire can, you knew it.
Yeah.
And you knew there was 57 or 85 coming your way, unless you did jink. You had to jink the right length of time in the right direction, and then you could hear the lock break. And you'd say, okay, this is effective, what we're doing. You couldn't do that. In 72, it was all automated. The system told you what it was. You weren't listening to the actual PRF, the radars. You were looking at what the computer, and I felt much better being able to hear the PRF because of the computers in A7 would get confused because there'd be so many in the air. And it was kind of, you get to Hanoi. There were so many fan songs up.
You can't discern that.
Maybe an ECM airplane that could target jamming and all that. I'm sure they're doing their thing. Well, it happened.
Hey, so tell everybody, when you say hear it, tell everybody that system actually puts something in your headset.
Right. Okay? Audio in your headset. So as you're coming in, you're listening to this radar, like when you're approaching the coast, and the spoon rest is an acquisition radar, and you're listening to that spoon rest, and that spoon rest is telling the air defense guy, okay, these airplanes are coming. So you can kind of visualize the battlefield. And you got much better in the 72 cruise. I actually had some out of body experiences. I was up several thousand feet. I was in the airplane as lead, but mentally I was up out of there looking at this division and where the sections were and the big picture. And I was up, it was an out of body kind of thing. Really quite strange. You're not afraid. When you first couple times you're pretty concerned about things. Yeah. But once you've been through it a few times and you start seeing that the guys that are getting shot down they're predictable, maybe cautious. Like those 10 guys, nobody got shot down until July 4th, 1967, when Phil Craig, he's the fraternity brother of Dave Parsons, had been there. He was we call ourselves the JO Mafia. And he didn't come back. So then and I put in the website, that changed everything for all of us, because he was as good as any of us. So that meant that he wasn't shot down because he just screwed up. He got shot down. It was a golden BB kind of thing. Yeah. So that meant any one of us was then, the chance of getting through that deployment, when you're there and you lose 2 pilots out of 23 in the first 7 days and you got 4 months to go, doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Now it turned out we didn't lose another guy until Pete Schoeffel got shot down and became a prisoner. And that was in October. And Pete and I are very good friends. I ride with him to lunches twice a month. And he was John McCain's roommate for 6 months. So he has a lot to say about John McCain. A lot of good things. John McCain was one of the bravest people that have ever been a POW. Yeah. And he had some issues that were not so good, but as far as his behavior as a prisoner of war, couldn't be any better. So,
and he was really banged up when he got out of the plane too, wasn't he?
He was when he got out, he came down and he was the executive officer of the A7 RAG, which is the training group for the A7s. And my buddy, my flight leader, Haas Montero, was the CO 174. Mm-hmm. And you got John McCain as your XO. But he had to tell him, to be CO 174, you were supposed to have been the commanding officer of a fleet squadron. Mm-hmm. And John McCain never was. Shoot, he got shot down on like his 7th flight. Yeah. So he really wasn't a combat tested person. Yeah. And he had never been a CO of a squadron. But those POWs got offered, kind of their choice. So I can't argue with that so much. And when he was CO 174, when I went through the RAG as a PXO, when I was commanding off on my way to be CO of an A7 squadron, he was the CO. Yes, Don McCain. He moved on. He was a better senator than he was a CO 174. but you can't.
And he was going after the same bridge, wasn't he?
When I think about, when I was going through flying the 105 and having a great time, and Pete Schoeffel was sitting there in prison, I think about it all the time, how tough it was. And those guys got through it. Anyway.
Bo, I have an uncle, Bo, shot down 4 days before Christmas in 1965, was there for 7 years.
7 years.
And at F4, got shot down his very first mission. He'd only been in country, I think, 5 days. Yeah, he left my house like 9 days before he got shot down. He came over to see us when he was living at George Air Force Base. And he was there for 7 years.
Oh, yeah. I love George Air Force Base.
Why is that?
Well, because that's where we went on our weapons test from the 105. And we had F4s there. And we could jump on F4s and do drag session. With the F4, you get with an F4 and start out at 350 knots and go to military power. The F4 is going to go right out in front of the 105. And then both airplanes get in burner. And at about 600 knots, the 105 just goes flying by. The F4 under rate is 750. And the F4, everybody in the F4 has seen that video of the F4 with pitch hog failure, where the airplane flops up and down, the two engines go flying out. So nobody gets really excited at 1,000 feet for going in an F4 going much over 650. And but we did all our ACM, and we did our at George Air Force Base. And I recently went, of course, it went the way of a lot of bases. It was great flying at George. And really good Liberty in Riverside. Yeah,
isn't that the truth? Everybody go down to the beach.
Over the hill.
Yeah, just over the hill from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
You talk about the Mark 20 Rockeye. Tell everybody why that was and you mentioned, you could toss it, but tell everybody what's inside that thing that made it such a good weapon too.
And the Rockeye is a cluster weapon. So, in the rules of the international, this is supposedly an illegal weapon. It was just ridiculous to me that anybody tries to judge wartime with civilian rules. I'm reading a bunch of books, and I'll get to the question. I'm reading a bunch of books about Africa written by this guy, Ralph Wilbur Smith. And you have the two sides there, and the white side is killing as many natives. And if they can do it, they'll get the wives and the kids out and massacre them. And then the Indians are trying to, if they get a white female, they're using her up. And the white guy in the book who was in charge when they shot all the women and children, war makes a monster of men. And he refused to do any more, and he became a logistician. In the 1970s, when the guy that the Rhodesian native guy was responsible for some pretty horrific acts, but ended up being a prime minister, said the same thing, war makes monsters of men. Well, if you aren't a monster in a war, you get beat, So do things. So cluster weapons are definitely effective. I did a lot of tactics against Soviet surface action ships with Rockeyes. And the Rockeyes, I forget the number of bomblets, 273 or some large number of bomblets. And those bomblets are spread out, so they're pretty good anti-personnel weapons, except they're capable, though, a Rockeye bomblet will penetrate 6 inches of steel. So
I didn't know that.
It's going right through a tank, and it's going right through the hull of a ship. It burns its way through, and so it's really. And when I used to brief flag officers about war at sea against the Kirov or something, I would have a Rockeye bomblet and I'd toss it to the and it's pretty impressive weapon, because in the A7 you can saturate like a football field, so it's hard to miss with a Rockeye. And a computer can put it, and if you got 4 of them per airplane, you can really do a lot of damage with them. They were great flak suppression things, because you have 2 flak suppressors with 2 Rockeyes each. You're throwing 1,500 bomblets at the fire can and the website. You're killing that crew. They're very effective. And I don't know, so we carried a couple of Rockeyes everywhere. Our normal road wreck, now this is just with A7s, 4 500-pound bombs and 2 Rockeyes. You can switch back and forth between the bomb. Of course, the computer knows the difference. You don't even have to think about it. You just put the flight path marker and start pulling over the even G's, and they come off when they're supposed to come off. And you just escape and look over the top and see what happens. So it's just pretty cool. You don't have to worry too much about controlling your airspeed, or, the computer does all that for you.
Yeah. You know what, Bo? I have pictures from Desert Storm of A7s off the Kennedy, and they're carrying Rockeyes. Yeah, because you can't miss that big white bomb.
No.
I mean, it looks like nothing else, and with that red nose fuse on it and everything like that. But I mean, we were using it in the 90s still because of the capabilities of that particular weapon.
Yeah, and of course, targets, the Scuds were the targets over there.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Rockeye was good against the Scud missiles. I was actually in Rion, Desert Shield, when Desert Storm was planned. The Desert Storm airplane was done, and I was Admiral Maws's TAC Air guy. And the Navy had to bring a 3-star in there because the Air Force had General Davis, who was a 3-star. So you can't have the Air Force who wants to control all the airspace. You got to get a Navy guy in there that has the same number of stars. Now, the difference is Admiral Maws was a surface guy, but he's smart as a whip. And he had been the commander of Cruiser Destroyer Group 12 and had a carrier battle group. And he was 7th Fleet. So I was in Atsugi at Comfair Westpac. I was the ops officer there, and I was Comm Orange for 7th Fleet exercises. And I got a call, you're going with Admiral Maws? Well, they didn't say. You're going to leave and you're going to be gone for 6 weeks. And so we got on a P3 and went down, and finally they got a permission to have him come in and relieve the 2-star. And I got to see meetings with General Schwarzkopf, Admiral Davis, Admiral Maws. We worked, it was a flag level working group, even though I was a Navy captain. There was a senior 105 Wild Weasel Brigadier General who was EW in charge of that. And he and I worked really closely together.
Larry Poobah Henry.
Yeah, I can't.
That's who it is. Larry Henry.
He was great. And then it turned out that General Davis's deputy had been a wing commander in the F-15s, but he was the deputy for the 2-star amphibious guy that was there on LaSalle, and he got moved over to General Davis's. John Miller, who was the 117 CO, was my student in McConnell, and we went from 105s to A7s in the desert, and that's what they flew in the daytime. So I mean, it was old Holmes Week, really was.
Isn't that interesting how important those relationships are? You had around you, Bo, people that you knew and that you worked with for a long time.
Yeah.
Their capabilities.
When I left in 72, I was supposed to go to Greenwich, to the Royal Navy Staff College in Greenwich. And I got changed to the Royal Air Force because I had 300 missions, and I had all these combat time with a heads-up display built by Elliott Brothers in Rochester, England. And they were the Israelis wanted to talk to somebody that had flown combat with a heads-up display, and we didn't have at our class at the RAF, we didn't have the Israelis because we had a Jordanian, and we had Jordanians and Afghans, and we had a lot of Indian MiG pilots in that squadron. And we had Bandar Faisal, who was the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was in there. And I used to go gliding with a guy named Lord McFadden, who was one of these. He was the senior RAF officer for Desert Storm. Bandar Faisal was in charge of the air defense of the oil fields there. These were all people that knew each other.
And you'd known each other for a long time.
I just that's the benefit of those staff colleges and those joint tours. My experience with 105 and the Air Force changed. That's why I was such a good Comm Orange, because I was able to talk to 15th Air Force about B-52s. General Hardinger got me F-16s sometimes out of Korea or someplace, out of Osan. It was just, anyway, it was a good way to go. And the 105 community was a lot like the Navy F8 community. It's just the way they did their business, how professional they were. To me, it was like being in a Navy squadron, and they treated me really well.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, episode 77. Now, there's still another hour and 9 minutes of my interview with Bo Smith, so I'm going to put that one up next week. But folks, imagine 650 knots in an F-105. And everybody will tell you that airplane, the Thud, when it went into burner, it would walk away from everything. And I remember Robin Olds talking to him on the phone, and he told me, he says, yeah, the F-105s, the Thuds leave the area at like the speed of lightning. So next week, we'll finish our interview with Bo Smith. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show was brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These, again, are beautiful profiles of your favorite aircraft printed in 4, 6, and 8 foot lengths on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. And yes, folks, we have found out that the patches that we do are in fact waterproof. A good friend of mine has had his AFSOC patches on the back of his truck, and he's washed that truck every other week, and now he's transferred them to another truck, and he said they slapped right on and they're doing great. So go to wallpilot.com and choose from 140 ready to print profiles, mostly jets, and we just added a few like the rivet joint and the Cobra ball, and order some of those because these are really detailed, and this is how we support the show, folks. So go by there and order 1 or 2 of these prints for your walls. Folks, like I mentioned, we were going to have some great guests on, and you heard some fantastic stuff from Bo Smith. And next week, we're going to talk to Bo about some of his specific missions over North Vietnam. And some of these are really, really scary, going after these barracks and different things. Folks, again, my condolences to my very good friend, Scott Brown. I love you, brother. So sorry that Tracy's no longer with us. And we'll talk to you again next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show.